Welcome to the 40 Days Podcast, a weekly podcast all about learning to practice the spiritual disciplines of Jesus and reflecting on your own spiritual journey. Let's jump in.
Hello, Estero Church, and welcome to this week 4 podcast. This week, we are going to be talking about and engaging the spiritual discipline of solitude and silence. In her book, Invitation to Solitude and Silence, Ruth Haley Barton gives the following illustration. She talks about this deep longing in her to know Jesus better that leads her as a successful pastor, writer, author, to a spiritual director. And after some work together, her spiritual director says to her, "Ruth, you're like a jar of river water all shaken up. What you need is to sit still long enough that the settlement can settle and the water can become clear." I think that description of being like a jar of river water all shaken up is a perfect description of most of our souls, including mine. We fill our lives with constant activity. We live in a world surrounded by noise. We swim constantly in an ocean of noise. When we're home, for many of us, we spend a great deal of time in front of our screens. TV, computer, phone, tablet, or at least we have the radio on. When we're in the car, the radio's on. We're always listening, always noise. When we go out to the store, think of it. Our ears are filled with traffic noise, in-store music, in-store advertising, people noise. We have created a world, and we live in a world flooded with noise. In fact, one of my favorite things, I've done some hiking, and one of the reasons that I've come to love the Everglades so much is that I love when I'm hiking to walk out of the sound of people. I love in the Everglades that you don't have to drive far, and there's so few people down there that you can get out of the sound of people and it's just quiet. But our internal worlds are also flooded with noise. Our minds and our souls are full of things to do and places to go and people to see and things to enjoy and thoughts and entertainment and keeping busy and keeping productive. Our mechanized world of convenient gadgets that was supposed to bring us so much more rest and peace has only enslaved us further, because the soul sickness was never going to be cured by making the tasks we choose to engage in easier. That soul sickness is that we have to constantly be producing and doing. At least in our culture which worships productivity, many of us feel the constant need to do. We go on vacation and come home exhausted because we jam so much in our rest time that we wore ourselves out yet again. The truth is that so many of us who live such sophisticated and grown-up lives, who've been so successful and who look so good on the outside, when it actually comes to obeying God's command to be still and know that I am God, we find ourselves acting like toddlers juiced up on Red Bull. And so this week, we're going to practice the very strange, at least to us, and entirely necessary practice, spiritual practice of solitude and silence. In fact, I would say that there is no other discipline that the ancient church practiced that the modern church, or at least the modern Western church, has lost, that is more important for us to recover than solitude and silence. Here's the goal of solitude and silence. Are you ready? to sit quietly in God's presence and to wait on him to show up and meet you. To sit quietly in God's presence and to wait on him to show up and meet you. This God who is other, who won't be controlled, who chooses when and how to come and meet with us. We wait for the Lord to come and meet us, and we wait quietly. Psalm 62:5 says, "For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence, for my hope is in him." For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence, for my hope is in him. Psalm 27 says, "I believe that I shall see the goodness of God in the land of the living." Wait for the Lord. Be strong. Let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. Isaiah 40:31 says, "But they who wait for the Lord, they'll renew their strength. They'll mount up with wings like eagles. They'll run and not be weary. They'll walk and not faint." What do? They wait for the Lord and they find their strength, their renewal there. Lamentations 3:25 says, "The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him." I could go on quoting scriptures that tell us to stop and wait in silence for God. Well, what does it mean to wait on the Lord? Well, here's what's going to happen when you start waiting on the Lord. When you start practicing silence and solitude, when you begin to take time out of the ocean of noise you live in and rest on that quiet mountain far from all the noise, here's what's going to begin to happen. Again, from Ruth Haley Barton's book, when we sit quietly in God's presence, the sediment that's swirling in our souls begins to settle. We don't have to do anything but show up and trust the spiritual law of gravity that says, "Be still, and knowing will come." I can tell you that, like any new habit, particularly one that will feel very foreign to many of you who are unaccustomed to quieting yourself, it will be strange and it will be hard at first. The truth is, as you come into solitude and silence, a lot of us sort of crash land. We hard land into it. We are carrying a multitude of things. The image that's in my mind is just that person who's got bag after bag and thing after thing, and they're trying to get it all up the airport ramp, to get off the plane, and they have 9 or 10 things and kids and car seats and bags and strollers, and they're just trying to bring all that stuff up the ramp. We come in carrying so many responsibilities, so many thoughts, all of that stuff. And when we get quiet, a lot of that stuff comes forward, which leads to the second thing. Those who have practiced this talk about when you first start to practice solitude and silence, you have this experience that it's been called the rush of the 1,000 voices. All this stuff that's been in our head, that's been sort of rolling around in the back of our head, but hasn't had any time for focus, or we haven't focused on it. All that stuff finds an opening in silence, and it's like it all comes rushing in at once. By the way, the key to kind of handling that stuff is to just pass it on to Jesus. I think of it as sitting on the bank of a river, and each of those thoughts is a boat that comes by, and I can let that boat dock and get on board and pay attention, or I can just let it cruise on down and pass it on down to Jesus. And the goal is to pass it on down. Now, sometimes I just find myself off. Not only did I get on the boat, I rode down the river on it. But then I just say, wait a minute, I didn't want to do this. I'm just trying to be quiet. And then I pass it on to Jesus and move on. You are absolutely assured, particularly if you haven't done much of this, absolutely assured, let me tell you, you're going to feel like this is dumb. You're going to feel like this is unproductive. You're going to feel like you're doing it wrong. You're going to feel like this isn't helping. And particularly when you have hard days doing this. I've been doing this a while now, and I can tell you there's some days, boom, you're in it and you nailed it. And there are other days where you can't settle your mind for anything. You are going to want to quit many times over. Trust me. Also trust me that the enemy of your soul wants nothing more than for you to quit. That's how important this is. Again, you're going to carry all sorts of things. You're going to eventually come to face the fact that you can't control God. That God won't manipulate. It won't be manipulated. That all you can do is patiently come and quietly wait for him to show up in his own way. When he does show up, one of the things that you'll realize is that he'd been there all along. You just couldn't see him for all your frantic activity, for all your attempts to make God show up in the way that you wanted. That he has, in fact, been there. He's other. He's other, but he promises he will meet you there, even if it's in ways you don't expect. And last, solitude and silence will bring you face to face with yourself in both good ways and bad ways. In bad ways, I mean in ways where solitude and silence will begin to really help you to know God, and in the midst of knowing God, to see yourself, and including some of the darker, harder parts of you. And it's as you begin to know how to bring those parts, how to sort through some of that stuff and bring it into God's presence and find out that they don't disqualify you, that God already knows, that those things will then really begin to help you to settle you in your relationship with God. In my own journey, solitude and silence really has, just in the last year, I would say, become a significant emphasis for me. I've done some of it before, but never consistently. I've tried it. I've liked it. I've appreciated the peace that it brings internally, but then I get busy and busy and busy and busy, and then I lose it. And really only over the last year have I really begun to lean heavily into solitude and silence. I can tell you that I feel different, that I know God better. I know myself better. I can tell you that my wife has said on multiple occasions, "You're more peaceful. There's something different about you." I can tell you that since I started practicing solitude and silence, I've had people say of my preaching and my ministry, my teaching, there's a different depth and edge to what you're doing now than what it used to be. All of that to me is a fruit of practicing this. It's been hard, and particularly there have been seasons where it's been hard for me because there have been things that I've come up against that I've spent a long time running from, and God's wanted me to deal with them. And so he just says, nope, don't run. Hang in here with us. Dallas Willard writes of knowing ourselves in light of who God is in solitude and silence. Listen to what he says. Accompanying this self-awareness is a desperate desire for healing and communion that is painful in its intensity. To truly see with the eyes of the soul our need for transformation at the very core of our being elicits a longing that is beyond words. This part of the spiritual process is so demanding that we may be sorely tempted to turn back. The problem with this possibility is that there's no place to go back to once we've seen ourselves for who we are. Enslaved to patterns of relating and being and doing that are ultimately antithetical to the life we're seeking. Where do we go once we realize that we've been living in bondage and we've glimpsed the way of freedom? This is the most important kind of knowing in human experience, and it comes only as we are quiet enough to let the faithful presence of God hold us in our brokenness until our brokenness is healed by love. All other kinds of knowing merely set the stage for this. As painful as it is, the process of seeing ourselves as we are and allowing God to do his work in the place that needs it most is full of grace. It offers the opportunity to break out of patterns of thinking and believing which distort our reality, condition our responses to others, and prevent us from living as a free self in God. It offers us the opportunity to give ourselves over to the one who loves us as we are and yet loves us too much to let us stay where we are. This is good and hard and deep work. I love what Willard says there. Work that's worth the effort of waiting on the Lord and finding and anchoring yourself in him. The best way to find out, at least not the best way, but certainly one strong example, is Jesus' life. We're fortunate that the Bible records a number of times when Jesus separated himself from people. In looking through these, we can see different reasons why Jesus chose to seclude himself. When he would prepare for a major task, in fact, the first thing he did before he did any public ministry was spend 40 days by himself fasting in the wilderness. Solitude and silence. After hard work, he would recharge. He would go away to recharge. There are times when you need to go away. Just be with God and let your soul be recharged. To work through grief and hard emotions. After he learned that John the Baptist had been killed, he seeks to go off by himself, seeks to take his disciples off, to get away from it all and to heal. Before he makes an important decision, Jesus spends the night in prayer. The next day, he starts calling individual disciples. In times of distress, what did he do right before he was arrested? He left his disciples. He went a stone's throw away by himself to pray. He was in great agony. And it's times to focus on prayer, just to unburden his soul in prayer. The Bible tells us many times that Jesus went alone and prayed. Last, let me close with the example of Elijah, burned out, depressed, ready to give up. He ends up in a cave on the mountain of God. The presence of God comes by, and there's a wind, and there's a storm, and there's fire, and then there's silence. And when Elijah hears the silence, he pulls the hood of his robe up over his head. He goes out to the mouth of the cave and he worships because God was in the silence. This week, you're going to have an opportunity, a great opportunity to just practice and dabble your toes into solitude and silence if you haven't been doing it. If you have been practicing this, hey, here's a great opportunity for you to do more. But we don't expect you to get this down completely in this week, but find something that works for you, some way that God speaks to you in the midst of a little, and then build and build and build. Be still and know that He is God. Hopefully this will whet your appetite so that you can come and feast at the table. Does your soul relate to this idea of river water stirred in a jar? The only way to settle it is to take time alone in silence in God's presence and allow the Lord to do His work. May it be so, and may you be blessed. Have a great week.
Well, thanks for joining us today. You can find our show notes with all the things we've talked about over on our website at estero.church. And don't forget, you can access our weekly devotional there or on the Estero Church app. If you loved this podcast, please share it with a friend. Thanks so much for watching. See you next week.